Hello, everybody, and welcome to Career Diaries by Elamed, the podcast dedicated to exceptional talent in the medtech industry. Today, I'm really excited to have Stefan Fischer from Hartmann here, talking about his career journey so far. So, Stefan, maybe you could just say a few words to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Elena. Thanks for the invitation, first of all. I'm really excited about it. So, as said, my name is Stefan Fischer. I'm 53 years old now, born and raised in Germany, married with one daughter. And as said, currently I'm the SVP of Paul Hartmann AG in south Germany.
So I mean, we've spoken in the past before as well, but definitely you've had a very impressive career so far in medtech. I guess like one of the questions I love asking people is, where did it all begin? You know, so if you were to take us all the way back, you know, how did you even get into the medtech industry?
Well, after school, I studied engineering, plastic engineering to be precise. And that was really just by coincidence. I liked chemistry, I liked physics and those kind of topics at school. So I went into this engineering, and it really grabbed my attention because it was interesting, it was creative, it was close to my hobbies. So I liked the study. And my first job was then with an injection molding company, a small family business in Munich. They were delivering to the automotive industry, to electronic industry. So a small company with 50 people at that time, and a very small management team. So I learned a lot from purchasing to manufacturing to quality to a lot of different areas, and that was kind of a little begin to the medtech industry because we also delivered parts into that area. But I changed there about 2 years after I started, 2.5 years, changed into the medtech industry to a company called Stöckert, which is part of Sorin Biomedical.
Okay.
And that was my real first life science job as a quality engineer.
And so obviously you were working at this kind of injection molding company, and you said that they were kind of working with all different industries, medtech being one of them. Yeah. What prompted you to actually decide, okay, now I want to go into medtech as opposed to automotive or any other industry? Was it pure chance, or was it more of a conscious, proactive decision?
I think it was really pure chance. That the company that I joined was close to this company, so we met, for example, during dinners and lunchtime and so on. It was a very close proximity, so it was pure chance. Yeah.
It's really interesting that, because I always find speaking to people that kind of sometimes the most interesting career moves are when it's literally you just fall into it, right? It's not really clearly kind of planned and thought out, but it's more an opportunity that you just go for and see how you can adapt to it. So I think that's definitely a similar story that I hear speaking to other people in the industry. So how long have you been working in medtech, would you say?
Overall now 28, 27 years overall.
And so you said that you came in as a quality engineer.
Yep.
And then through your career, have you mainly been focused on the quality regulatory, or?
Now, at that time, it was quality control, quality assurance areas. I was in charge of a manufacturing side for their quality part, for example. Also came in contact at that time with the FDA because they were delivering into the US. So that also interested me. And from that onwards, I stayed in medtech industry. Yeah, but there's another interesting coincidence, as you mentioned it. I had a little lottery win at that time. So
oh, really?
I won a few thousand euros, less than 10,000. I don't remember the exact number. And I spent the money in my second study. So I did another diploma parallel to work because I didn't have another idea for spending the money, so I put it into my career, and that prompted then the next steps.
So no crazy holidays to Vegas then to spend it. Definitely sounds like definitely sounds like it was a well-made investment. How important do you think, because this is a question that a lot of candidates ask me, Elena, is it more important that I study and learn the theory, or should I just go for it and try to get the experience without necessarily having the credentials? I know sometimes it's quite personal, but as a hiring manager yourself, what's your take on that?
Well, now I'm hiring a lot of people, and I would always go for the practical part of it, for getting the experience. Because the theory you can always learn. You can study afterwards, you can study your lifelong if you like to. And it helps, I think, if you have the similar background when you talk to people, for example, in operations or in R&D. You have to use the same words, you have to talk about the same tools and these kind of things, but this is what you learn. But the work experience, for me, is much more important.
Yeah, it gives you that hands-on kind of practical knowledge, that you can kind of take into that role. So tell me about kind of like, let's say, because obviously now you're VP, senior VP, so you obviously have a big responsibility, but you started off as a quality engineer. So talk to me about your first role into leadership and how that was for you.
So after that job at Sorin, I went on to another company, also in the Munich area, where I combined quality and regulatory for the first time. And when I started, the current head of the department left a few weeks after, so I was kind of thrown into the water and say, now you have to run the show. It was a very small team, I think 2 people at that time, but it was not much preparation, so I had to get along with it. And I kind of added more responsibility to it as I went through this.
So, I mean, what would you say, kind of coming up through leadership, what would you say has been the biggest challenge from a leadership perspective that you've experienced in your career so far?
I think there were many challenges. Right now, I would say I have one, because I'm reporting into the board, into my boss is part of the board, Paul Hartmann. And for such a big company, he is not the expert on quality or regulatory. So in my previous career, I always had someone ahead of me or on top of me who was the functional expert of that area. And now I have someone who I kind of need to explain things and give background to what I do and why I decide things. So this is really a challenge. If you get up into the career, at a certain point, you need to be able to transfer what you have learned into easy wording. Maybe that's the wrong expression in English, but you have to break down rules like the medical device regulation into very easy, understandable, logical rules to explain it to a board member.
It's almost counterintuitive, but you kind of start, if you think about the career path into really senior leadership, you start becoming, a specialist. Maybe you don't have any knowledge in a certain area, and you become more and more expert as you go. And in order to progress up your career, you need to demonstrate an ability, a certain expertise in whatever area you're focusing on, and that for a long time will determine your success. But I do a lot with senior leaders, and we place quite a lot at VP level, and then you see this kind of switch, which is now what we really value at the top level is the ability to simplify and the ability to actually take complicated concepts but be able to make that really simple, as if you're speaking, to a 5-year-old, they say, right? If you can explain it to a 5-year-old, then you're explaining it well. And it's really interesting to see that is like a potential, development almost. What would you say in order to be successful? Because I speak to a lot of people that are really keen on, developing and moving up, into big leadership roles. What do you think, apart from the communication piece that we've just spoken about, what else does it take to be successful in that type of role?
Well, first of all, I would say you cannot always keep moving up. There will be some occasions where you have to step down a little, or where you run into a situation where you say, okay, that's now outside of my comfort zone, and that's maybe not the right role, or I need to learn before I get to that role. So I think you need to also digest that if you fail. If you don't do that, then you will not get the next step after that failure. I think that's very important. The other part that helped me a lot is that it's more and more important in a leadership role to put the right team together. If you're good at hiring the right people, if finding the right people, if attracting the right people, and putting them together in a way that they work effectively, I think that's the big move. That makes yourself and your team successful.
So I think that's really, you touched on two really interesting points there. One was failure, you know, being able to accept that and to improve on that. And the other one you spoke about is hiring. So obviously that's a major topic for me and something that I'm really passionate about. And I think it's really interesting that you talk about it's not just about the individual, you know, it's actually about, it's not the lead singer, it's the whole band put together. How do you build a successful team? You know, is there a secret formula?
That would be easy. I could sell it and be a millionaire. Yeah. No, I think it's balance that I'm looking for. So if you have a team of, typically you have a team something between 5 and 10, I would say that's the right size. So I'm looking for right balance from background, from age, from culture, from all these kind of things. I just last year, for example, I hired a person who was 65, and that person was really surprised that we gave him the chance. And I said, well, I think you're a good match in my team, because I had a lot of junior people in that team, so they get along really well. On the other hand, you also need to overcome then those challenges that come out of that people in let's say my age, 50 plus, they have possibly a different rhythm of work. They take possibly a day off in the home office to get things done, or work differently than a young person that works 15 hours a day. So I think putting the team together in a balanced way. On the other hand, it's all about communication and objectives. If you're not able to give the team the direction and the bigger picture and the bigger reason why they do this, you will fail in putting the best people together. You can put high caliber people together if they don't know where to go.
So when you're hiring these people, when you're hiring for a team, how much of it for you in terms of the decision making, how much of it is gut instinct and feeling versus I know some people will, for example, literally have a spreadsheet of like key things and check it off and kind of see, you know, more, let's say logically taking the emotion out of it. They make their decision that way. For you, kind of, do you lean more to one, or is it more of a balance? And how do you actually go about making those decisions when you're hiring?
I personally lean more towards the gut feeling. There's this saying, if you don't want to invite someone at home, don't hire that person. So I need to get along with that person in business life. If I don't like to spend time with that person, I think it's difficult. But during the interview, there are always more people involved. It's not me myself. It's the team leader, typically. It's the HR person. Maybe even more. Sometimes we invite the whole team to get to know the candidate. And everyone brings something to the table that is important. So I think I'm more the gut person, but I know that maybe the not that much experienced people will not go for the checklist or have case studies or do a few hours of work with the team just to try it out.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, you know, the more that I speak to people, the more important that feeling piece is as well, right? You could have the perfect candidate on paper, but if that person doesn't fit well into that culture, it's going to be difficult for them to be successful. And also at a certain level, there needs to be that trust, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And I typically also do kind of a routine if I hire. I do a quick telephone interview up front. So something like 20 minutes, half an hour max, because then you typically have a good feeling for if you get along with that person, or if that person brings the right background and interest to the company. And then do the face-to-face meeting. And if I have any doubts, I give the person another call and really try to find out, is there something that we didn't cover? Are there questions? Is it not clear what we're expecting? These kind of things. So if I'm in doubt, I do that 2 or 3 times if needed, and then hopefully the candidate and myself are very clear about the expectations.
So I think the other thing that you mentioned, so coming back to kind of the other
Mhm.
the big thing that you mentioned about failure, because I think it's always really good to hear about people's successes, but sometimes we learn most from our failures and kind of, I guess, where things go wrong. What would you say has been your biggest failure so far in your career? Difficult
Well,
question.
I know it's not a secret. I definitely failed in my startup company that I joined,
Okay.
where I was the COO and CFO of a startup company, and we had real fast growth. It's the typical thing. You have a small team, and then you build the patent and the tools and the manufacturing and the whole thing. And after 2 years, we had the product on the market. We had it CE marked. Everything's fine, but we failed in the follow-up process, like building the sales organization and getting a stable manufacturing and these kind of things. So that was in my business the biggest failure, yes.
And what would you say, kind of like, how has that helped you then in your career moving forwards? Except for just don't join a startup.
No, I don't regret anything. It was an experience that I wouldn't like to miss.
Yeah.
Also, it was painful and expensive for sure.
Yeah.
I think 2 things came out of that because I worked really like day and night, and I was, I think, pretty close to a burnout. So that is something that I really took seriously, and balancing your workload. It's not for me. It's not about work-life balance. It's more about have a job that really satisfies you and doesn't kill you. I think that's the one part. The other part I really learned with that is that communication and expectations, like I said before, is so important. You really need to know what are you working for, what is the purpose of that company, what is the purpose of that product. And if it's only about money or going public or something like that, I would not do that again.
So tell me more about the lead into the startup, because that sounds really interesting, because I've always imagined you, or I've always had you down for more of a corporate guy. So so talk to me a little bit more about the startup piece.
Yeah, I think a few years before that, I was also in charge of a manufacturing site in Italy. And so I learned a lot about manufacturing and lean manufacturing, Six Sigma, all these kind of things. And one of our customers was associated with that startup company. So they asked me if I would like to join, and they made the offer for the GM position, and I took it. It was, again, like we said before, chance.
Absolutely. And how would you see the difference between working in a startup environment versus working in a global organization?
Yeah, big difference. In a startup, you have to do everything. You have to take care of cleaning the offices and getting the money to the bank to pay the salaries and everything. So it's a completely different world. And if you're a small team, even more. And typically with a startup company, you run in some kind of financial trouble at a certain point where you need to raise new money or go public, or every challenge you have, every failure you have is really endangering the whole company. It's not like in the big corporate where you have a complaint or a recall or something that is not killing you, but in a startup company you have possibly one product and that's it, or you have one market, and if you fail there, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So real big differences in responsibilities and in consequences.
And then kind of looking through your career then, so what would you say has been like your most defining moment?
I think I had a few defining moments in my private life.
Okay.
So very early, my daughter is now 23, so a long time ago, I stayed at home for almost a year at that time. As my former wife.
So you were a stay-at-home dad?
Yeah, I was at that time.
I love that. You said that was 23 years ago, you said?
Yeah.
Wow.
So that was really unusual at that time, at least in Germany too. There was no state support or recognition or anything like that. At that moment, I really thought my career stops. I will stay at home for the rest of my life. But it turned out completely different. So that was for sure a defining moment. From a private life, definitely have excellent relationship with my daughter, and that really gave me a lot of value back. But also now in the career, everyone who reads that or who I tell that, like you, says, "Oh, I like that, and that is interesting." And at that time, it was completely the opposite. Everyone said, "Why do you stop your career? You cannot do that. You throw away your job. Are you crazy?" And sometimes things turn out exactly the opposite.
That's such an interesting thing, and especially like at the time when you did it 23 years ago, as you said, it probably wasn't as even today. It's not that common. I mean, I do think that we are moving more towards this being kind of common, that people are taking paternity leave. But 23 years ago, that must have been quite. How did people react when you told them? Like, were they genuinely shocked?
Yeah, definitely. My boss was shocked for sure.
Yeah.
But also, if at that age of my daughter was 1 year old, you go to kindergarten, you sit in those typical female rounds and talking about diapers and these kind of things, and even those people were shocked that there's a male in that round. Yeah, so definitely from a career perspective, a lot of negative feedback at that time.
But that must have been really also eye-opening for you to see things, because this is probably something that a lot of women go through as well.
Yeah.
What did you learn from all of that? What were your key takeaways?
Well, it also impacts my hiring, for example, because today the women are typically better educated and have the higher qualification in life science, I think, generally. So in the interviews, you see a lot of young women, very talented, very engaged, very educated, and you shouldn't have any holdbacks there for hiring someone, because they might get pregnant or something else in their career might happen. So that was a learning that I took with me. On the other hand, I think sometimes you do moves that you don't know how they turn out at the end. It could also have turned out completely as a disaster. So if I look at the CV of a candidate, maybe I'm not that careful with if they have some curves or some problems in their CVs. I don't think they're that serious. Maybe I ask and I say what was the reason or what did happen, but I'm not looking for this straight every 3-year development career CVs any longer.
So just coming back to that. So you did that for 1 year, but then you came back into into work. Did you find any difficulties getting back in at the same level where you left off?
No, not really. I was asked to come back and I did.
Okay.
And I still kept the contact during this 1 year, so I worked a few hours from home just to stay in that position. And the same company hired me back, so no problem.
So it was good that you were able to just kind of like keep the relationship going then with your company. So you took it as a paternity leave, but was there always an idea that you would go back after that 1 year?
No, it was a one-way decision, so no.
Oh, okay. But then they approached you and said, "Hey, we need you back."
Yep, essentially.
So I think that's definitely, that's fascinating to hear, and I think it's so great, that men do that. Because it isn't only a woman's job, and as you say, it's especially in those early years, it's a great chance to really build those strong relationships, and now you say you have a great relationship with your daughter.
Yeah.
Do you see
also the relationship to my former boss or to any of my bosses? I think it's so important. You need to build also that relationship and maintain that relationship if you can through your lifetime and through your career, because life science is a small industry and you always meet twice, and you shouldn't leave a job if usually nothing crazy happens in damaging any of your relationships.
That's something that I've heard a number of times before, that in medtech you always meet twice, and that it is a small industry. Building relationships, how important has that been in your success?
I'm not a big networker, I would say. So I didn't get any of my jobs through public networks or Facebook groups or anything like that. On the other hand, I think where it's very important to build relationships is really with people that you kind of admire, that you bring new ideas to the table. So I had, for example, two very good mentors that I really enjoyed working with. I did also coaching sessions, and I'm also trying to build relationship outside of my current work area with people from different functions or from different industries even.
So the mentoring is something that I find really interesting, and I guess for the people listening, if there's somebody out there that's kind of like, hey, I want a mentor, but how do I get one? I mean, how do people go about finding mentors? How did you find your two mentors in the first place?
Yeah, one came really through a mentoring program at that company at that time, but the other I approached directly and said, I'm interested in learning something different, and that person was from sales, which is very far away from where I feel okay. So I was really interested in a different angle of the business and approached that person directly.
What did you learn? What did you learn from somebody that has sales experience? How can that apply to regulatory and quality?
It's a different world. I really enjoy working with customers. So at the moment, I'm also doing a lot of speaking sessions with our customers about MDR changes and things like that. So I like being with customers, and I always enjoyed working also with key accounts in different cultures and countries. But I'm not the typical salesperson. I always say I can sell a good product, but I would never be able to sell a bad product. And I think for a salesperson, it should not matter that much. You need to be good at what you're doing, and that is selling. It's not about the product maybe you're selling. So having a different aspect to the behavior, and from the mentoring side, the mentoring is all about asking the right questions. It's not about telling the people or the person that you mentor what to do. It's really asking the question to get the person to understand the thing on their own. And that is something that I really learned, asking the right questions, not jumping into conclusions, which I do, unfortunately, still, because if you're experienced, you always think you know the solution. And you have to hold back and be conscious about it and not jump into conclusions and say, okay, why did you do that? What was the reason? What is the background? But also asking in situations where things go wrong. My best question, I think, is always, what could you have done differently? I think that's a very open and a very nice question. Instead of saying you did something wrong or I'm of a different opinion, try to find out what the person thinks that he or she could have done differently.
So in terms of the mentoring, I think obviously you find that important, otherwise you wouldn't have done that. How would you define the difference between mentoring and coaching though?
In my experience, and I only had a short coaching so far, the coaching is really about you personally and looking at what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. Coaching is something that you yourself want to change. For the mentoring, in my view, it's more learning additional things. It's not changing what you do or what you are. It's more about getting new perspectives to your private life, work balance, work life, whatever you want to get mentored on.
And so in terms of looking at your experience, like how much would you say of your success has come from these mentoring and coaching sessions? Should people be proactively going out and doing that if they haven't done that so far?
It's hard to tell. You cannot say 10% is from that exercise and 20% is from that exercise. It adds up, and I think that's something that I also try to do consciously. Is you have to take yourself out of the day-to-day business from time to time and reflect. Is what you're doing today the right thing? Do I need to change principal approaches to things or principal ways I'm working? If you're running into this hamster wheel every day, you sometimes forget to take yourself out and look at yourself and your situation. Those exercises like mentoring or coaching or 360 or whatever you do, they typically happen outside of the normal day-to-day stuff. So it always gives you a chance to reflect and have a look at yourself from the outside. I think that's the important part.
And this whole thing around reflection and getting kind of outside of the data, off the hamster wheel, if you like, I think that's so important, because that's something even I find myself. You can really get sucked into the day-to-day kind of more operations and further away from the strategy, and a lot of the time the strategy is the thing that really moves the business forwards. But what do you do? So are there any practices or anything specifically that you do to detach yourself from that hamster wheel in order to have that time to reflect?
Yeah, one thing I did over the years is really when I see something, when I read something, when I get some training that is really good, I keep that very close to myself. So I have a little folder where I copy things in and write things in, and that is always in my work package that I carry around every day. So when I have time at the airport or wherever you have some time, I pull it out and read through it, because I think you have to repeat it consciously, because otherwise you just forget about it. So this is one of the practices. Now I forgot the other one, sorry.
No worries. I think like having that, it's definitely important to kind of like be able to record in order to reflect, and having that little black book or just notes on your iPhone, which is basically what I do, but maybe that's because we're a different generation. But I think it is definitely important to have the chance to do that and to detach from this hamster wheel in order to really reflect if what you're doing is having the right impact and in the right direction. What about, so let's talk about kind of like on a bigger scale, more about, let's not talk about work so much, right? So what about work-life balance? Because you said something earlier on that was really interesting, and you said, I don't believe in work-life balance, which might be a bit controversial because people are constantly talking about this work-life balance and how important it is to have balance. Why do you not believe in it in that way? And so how do you achieve this sense of not feeling too overwhelmed?
I think in our time where the work is so demanding, and in our industry where the work is so demanding, and at a certain career level, you cannot step out of this. You cannot say at 6 o'clock I turn off the iPhone, or I don't read my emails on the weekend. That doesn't simply work. So I think you need to find a balance within that work, and that means also possibly that sometimes you have lunch during the day with your wife and step out of your office for an hour or two and relax that time. So it doesn't be a clear cut between work and life. I think that's what I would define it. On the other hand, I'm very lucky that my wife is taking care of almost everything else. So when I get home, I don't need to clean the dishes or do anything. So we have found a rule that works for us. But this is also on the basis that we are always very close together. We would not be able to have a relationship that is kind of from Friday evening to Sunday evening, and I would be off the whole week. That would not work. If I moved somewhere for work, my wife would always move with me, and we make a joint decision. And that way we can have some quality time, even if I spend a few days on the weekend for work. And for me, that is the balance between the partners and find the balance within your work life.
So it's important to have a partner that kind of understands the demands on your time and what you do, and between you to find a way to make it work. I really like the idea of going for lunch in the middle of the working day. I think I'm going to have to have words with my fiance, because that's not something that he's doing with me just yet. So what about kind of in terms of like self-development? Because you said earlier on as well that you like learning and you like evaluating. What do you do to get outside of your comfort zone and to continually self-develop?
From time to time, I do things that are also kind of outside of the career. So a few years ago, I think I had to learn golfing. So I did a golf course and enjoyed that very much. Looking at things out of the business is important, but developing also in the business. I also, a few years ago, I realized that I didn't have a formal auditor training so far. I always were running big auditor teams and doing a lot of audits, but I never had the certificate for it. So I said, okay, let's do it. and I took the test and got the certificate. But it's sometimes hard to find the right thing. Sometimes it's learning languages or learning new tools and things like that. I think learning itself is important.
Do you like to read books?
Yeah, very much. I'm a paper book reader. I read many books very fast.
What would you say is your most recommended book? What had the biggest impact on you?
I'm collecting a few that I read really from time to time, twice and three times. I like the well-established old guys. People like Peter Drucker, Jack Welch, these kind of guidance books I really enjoy a lot, because I think they have so much experience and they can share so much, and reading through these things, sometimes you agree, sometimes you disagree, but it's also learning. So I keep maybe 20 or 30 books from those things that I really want to maintain. And I read a lot of books that I just give away, share, and never read again.
I think it is sometimes with these with kind of leadership books, you know, sometimes you do have to read them more than once, because you don't always quite catch it straight away, and sometimes when you read it for a second time, there's another layer to it that you don't quite see the first, but I think that's so important and so interesting. I'm really interested in people's daily routines, right? This is like my newest thing, because mindset is something that, at least for me, I'm seeing that have more and more of an impact. In order for you to kind of like have your day, is there kind of like a certain routine that you go through every day in order to set yourself up for a good day?
Yeah, I would say there is. So I really try to be home for breakfast, for example. So I don't like to start at 6 o'clock in the morning, work and skip breakfast. So I typically walk the dog at 6 o'clock. So I'm out for half an hour with the dog, and then I prepare the breakfast and have breakfast. So I'm in the office 7:30, 8 o'clock, and then the day starts. And at my current position, we kind of have meetings all day. There's seldom a gap in my calendar where I don't have meetings. So I block an hour at lunchtime, and typically spend the lunchtime with the team in our canteen, and we talk about work and talk about private, and then back to work. So that is the timing, I would say, of my routine. I have a very strict routine with my emails, so I'm a pretty fast responder to the emails, but I also have a to-do list and a backup to-do list where I keep things that are more cumbersome or more require more work to do. So I have a few tools that I use regularly as a routine. But my day is typically structured in a way that I try to be at least home either for breakfast or for dinner, spend some time, and also meet with my team in the canteen over lunch.
Coming back to the email thing, just out of interest, because this is something that I struggle with, and I'm sure other people out there listening probably also struggle with. What would you say is like the email etiquette?
You mean in writing or in working them away as they come in?
In everything. So like how do you go about making sure that like you're on top of everything, that it's not all piling up? Is there a certain length that email should normally be written, or, you know, are you happy to sit there and kind of write a really big long email? For me, just the point is that, because for me, if it's longer than 6 lines, I'd rather just pick up the phone. So I'm just curious to see how you organize that and manage it, because I'm sure you have loads of incoming traffic.
Yeah, I get something between 200, 300 emails a day, I guess. But picking up the phone or walking to the office and speak to the person face to face is always the best thing if you can do that. But when you have times when people are not available or sitting at a different site. So my emails tend to be very short, sometimes too short. And then I get a reminder from my colleagues and my team and say, what did you want to say? So that happens. And I'm also sometimes in such a hurry that you write it during the meeting or on your iPhone, and then it gets very short and sometimes really not understandable. So I move more towards telephone calls, and writing emails for me is something where you either want to involve more people, or you really want to explain things in more depth, and you can put attachments and pictures and things like that. So typical email is very short and just say, this is the facts, what do we do, or this is the decision, let's do it. Longer emails are really with a different purpose.
Yeah, totally. I think you can't easily read it on a phone, then pick up the phone and speak to somebody, because otherwise, nobody wants to sit there reading a really, really long email. And also there's the risk that people misunderstand what you're trying to say, sometimes with those long ones. So it's really important to do that. And it helps with relationships as well in the end. So here's a question, a reflective question. So if you could go back and talk to yourself at the age of 21 again, what advice would you give to yourself?
That's a tough one. I'm pretty happy with my life, and everything that happened might have a purpose, and I'm not regretting anything. What I should possibly have started earlier is really learning more. Because at the beginning of your career, you're so much into getting along and earning money and doing more and making a career. You should step out earlier maybe in your life and say, what exactly do I want to do? What will help me get to the point where I want to be? But if you're young, you're typically not thinking that way. So maybe that's easy said, but not easy done.
So being a little bit more strategic sometimes in kind of like where you go with it. Yep. And I have one more big question for you right now. What is the legacy that you want to leave on the world?
I think that word is too big for me anyway. What I know that satisfies me at the moment is working for a purpose, and Paul Hartmann, for example, we are currently doing massive workload with the coronavirus, because we are producing face masks, we are producing disinfectant solutions. So I think purposeful work is very important, and if I hear people that I worked with in the past, or my ex-team members speak well of me, and companies are still keeping my SOPs and tools and things like that, so that is really satisfying. On the other hand, if you're reaching a certain age, I think you also want to give something back. So I really like mentoring young talents and trying to share some of the knowledge that I might have, or that they may disagree or agree with, but find a platform to really help them.
I think it's so interesting, this kind of the talk about purpose, because that's definitely something that I would say over the last few years I'm hearing more and more about. And I don't know if you saw the piece that Simon Sinek did on purpose, and the infinite game from a company perspective is all about basically like, what is the goal that you're aiming towards, but it's not a finite goal. It's a goal that will continue, you will continue to strive, that you're never really going to reach, but it's always about having that vision in the future that you're working towards. And he also talks about your why, so kind of like, what is the big reason behind what you're doing, and also keeping that in mind. So that's something that I hear a lot of, and I find that really interesting. What would you say is your purpose then?
Well, for me, my philosophy is that I need to enjoy work. I think that the real benefit from regulatory and quality work is that you can be very creative. You need to know the rules, and you need to use them to your and the company's advantage. So creativity is very important for me. And if I bring the company forward that I work with, and if I develop people that I work with, I think that would be a very good purpose.
It's all about giving something back, and also having that impact, as you say, right?
Yeah.
No, Stefan, thank you so much for your time. It's been really interesting hearing all about your career journey, about the fact that, you were a stay-at-home dad, and what leadership means to you, and what you do to achieve work-life flow rather than the balance. I found that fascinating. So thank you so much for joining me today on our podcast. And to all of the people here that are listening, don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. If you found value in some of the comments that Stefan has shared with us today, definitely comment below and let us know. And thank you, everybody. Have a lovely evening, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Elena. Bye.